Hello to all our viewers and welcome. Today we'll be discussing the presumed death of Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner private military contracting company of Russia, and we'll be discussing how this event is connected with greater events in Russia and the world. This is my colleague Vasily. He's a PS International Secretary, and our comment from Russia will be covering the latest events in the country.
Hello,
Vasily.
comrades.
Now, how did the events of yesterday unfold exactly?
Well, first of all, we'll have to see the timeline of all these events. I will be referring to the Moscow time. It all started in about 7:30 p.m. There were first reports about business jet crash in Tver region. Tver is situated to the north of Moscow region. Later, the first messages appeared that this jet, Embraer Legacy 600, belonged to Yevgeny Prigozhin. And firstly, there were different messages from Wagner Telegram channel, in particular, that this jet was shot down by the Russian anti-air. However, later this information turned out to be false. First messages started appearing that about 7 people were on this aircraft. They all died, and the first messages appeared that Yevgeny Prigozhin was mentioned on the list of passengers in this plane. There were some videos of this plane crashing and burning. You can see them on the screen right now. So here is one of them. And there is another one. A bit later, in about 8 p.m., 8:30 p.m., sources started saying that they cannot call Prigozhin on his phone, and at the same time, there were some events happening dedicating the 18th anniversary of the Soviet victory in the Kursk battle. Putin was making a speech on this event. He was saying that he wants to congratulate the special military operation participants for their service. He said he is proud of the Russian armed forces, and at the same time, Russian Rosaviatsia Commission was organized to make research on this plane crash. In about 10 p.m., it was announced that some of Wagner commanders started confirming that Yevgeny Prigozhin is dead. They also started saying that Dmitry Wagner Utkin is dead. Utkin was Prigozhin's deputy in the Wagner organization, and he was the one who, after whom the actual private military corporation was named. Like, Wagner was his nickname. Also, some mass media noticed that Rosaviatsia stated that the plane belonged to Prigozhin and that he was among the passengers of the plane, like, very quickly. Usually they announce this thing in about 2 hours after the crash, and when it actually happened, they posted this message in about 10 or 15 minutes, like, extremely quick. In about 10:30 p.m., it was announced that the passengers' bodies were highly damaged, and it will require to make DNA research to confirm. However, Prigozhin was confirmed to be among the passengers, like he was confirmed to be dead because they found the body with one finger missed, and it was Prigozhin who missed one finger. And they also found his mobile phone. So in about 10:30, 11 p.m., both Prigozhin and Utkin were confirmed to be dead. Just recently, Putin made a brief speech about this thing. He announced that he knew Prigozhin from 1990s. He considered him to be a good and trustworthy person, and that he was doing big things in Africa.
Right, and this news exploded all over right-wing Telegram in Russia. Lots of right-wing groups are big fans of Prigozhin and Wagner in general. And so there's concern that this was a political maneuver at first, but more and more it's seeming confirmed that really Utkin and Prigozhin have died. And I believe their bodies were taken to the morgue, and more confirmation of that was given. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. As I said, like Prigozhin's body was recognized by several specific features, and Utkin was recognized after DNA research. As for now, their bodies are still in morgue, and it's 100% confirmed that they are dead. However, the main question that was in place, what actually happened? Right now, Russian Commission says that there was explosives were placed somewhere near plane's chassis, and it was probably done when the plane was going through repair things. Like it was in repair hangar, and the commission says it's probably the most obvious place where these explosives could be placed on the plane.
Mm-hmm. And we've heard of the second plane, which was owned by Prigozhin, and that was the first kind of confirmation that we had that this involved Prigozhin, was that this plane, which crashed near Tver, belonged to him. And now, well, soon after, we heard about a second plane, which he owned, which he could have been on. There was something, not to give any credence to the claims of air defense batteries, shooting down any planes. What about the story of this second plane that began to spin around Moscow and which landed safely in the end? What's up with the second plane?
Yeah, the situation was that both planes belonged to Prigozhin. They were his property, and when the first plane crashed and it exploded, the second one started making maneuvers in Moscow air. It landed successfully, and just several hours ago, like today, right now, it was announced that this plane was going to Baku, Azerbaijan. It it probably landed successfully because I saw some emergency news about this plane, and when the first plane crashed, there were some rumors that Prigozhin can be on the second plane. However, well, as we know now, he was on the first plane, and it was the first plane that got destroyed.
Mm-hmm. And I want to ask you now about how we characterize this event and Wagner in general, because in past years and in past months, Western sources have constantly said Wagner equals Russia. That Wagner is a direct, kind of line to Putin, and everything Wagner does is what Putin wants, and everything Wagner does is actually the secret actions of the Russian state. But now we've seen a lot of disruption of this narrative that the West has been putting out for a long time. And even maybe some people inside Russia who want to support unity might say that Wagner is still loyal. What is what is the characterization that you can give to this figure who, just a short while back, had this big patriotic mobilization, march on Moscow, this kind of illegal action that he did. What does this say about his end and his role in Russia?
Sure. Well, before the events of late June 2023, Prigozhin was considered to be a part of the ruling Russian capitalist group because he was actually promoted by Putin. He had a nickname Putin's cook because he was responsible for organizing food deliveries to Kremlin, for organizing different events. And later he managed to get control under the food supply chains for Moscow schools, for Russian army. He also created some media holdings, and of course this private military company nicknamed Wagner. However, after these events, it was extremely problematic for the government because they were claiming that they have national unity, they are strong, they are united, and this guy who was considered to be their primary column, their primary pillar in their stability, he just started rolling his army on the Moscow. His column was in one day from Moscow, from entering Moscow. And the funny thing, it's funny now, but back at that period, of course, it was not funny for the government, was that they had basically no forces in these regions of Russia to protect the Moscow region from Wagner. The Wagner column was heading for Moscow through Rostov region, through Lipetsk region, and the government ordered the city workers, like people involved in city public services, to start destroying roads. For example, you can see there are some videos of this thing. People were just going through regional roads, and they saw them being either destroyed or blocked by trucks. So here,
Дорогу, видимо, пытались перекрыть на Москву. Вагнера, видимо, расхуячили, раскатали, блядь. Вышли нахуй.
КамАЗ trucks.
В ту сторону закрыто.
Стою перед Чаплынским районом. Короче, все. Нам больше не проехать. Как домой?
And the most unexpected thing was probably that all this ended with Lukashenko's intervention. Like, nobody expected Belarusian president to step up and say, all right, I'm the one who will calm them both down. That was really unexpected.
Right, and mentioning Belarus, the kind of deal was, or at least presented to be, that Wagner would go to Belarus kind of in exile there so that they wouldn't be in Russia and there wouldn't be a repeat of this march on Moscow. Is Wagner in Belarus right now, and what is the expected behavior of Wagner in Belarus with Lukashenko still being an ally of the Russian Federation?
Yeah, after the rebellion, Prigozhin was considered to be like the main destabilizer of the national unity, and he was transferred to Belarus under certain guarantees from the Russian president. His troops were also relocated to Belarus, where they started building camps for them in Mogilov region. But it was not just Belarus, because Wagner was still involved in numerous activities across the world. And, after the rebellion, Prigozhin lost his trust among the Russian ruling group of capitalists. And well, from the current events, it is clear now that the government is trying to bring fear, to make any possible opposition to be quiet and silent. Even those who are, like Angry Patriots Club, like people who enjoyed Prigozhin, who supported him. Despite these guarantees, Prigozhin got into this accident and he's dead now. And well, if we speak about the next actions of Wagner Group, I think we will see. They're still in Belarus. They're still under on Lukashenko's territory, and what will they do? How this will affect the, for example, second wave of mobilization, which rumors about which are circulating across Russia, and the whole course of the Russia's special military operation in Ukraine, as they officially claim, it's yet to be seen.
And we have an even further development of what came after the march on Moscow by Wagner, where Prigozhin was kind of presented as a possible political opposition to Putin's leadership, or a replacement for Putin, or something like this, some kind of political alternative. And that was diminished by the march, right, in the eyes of the Russian people. And now he's completely removed from the picture. And I wonder, what will you mentioned that so many people on the right supported him. What will these Z people do next?
Yeah, you see, the main thing is that Prigozhin wasn't actually against Putin. Like, on the contrary, as I said, he was considered to be Putin's from the Putin's gang, probably, and he was shown as like their conflict. There was a conflict between Wagner Group and Russian Ministry of Defense. Russian army stopped supplying the Wagner Group with ammo, with oil for their vehicles, and I would even say that Prigozhin's speech became a meme in the Russian society. A video was very popular, circulating for several months in Russian social networks, with Prigozhin standing on the video and fiercely asking Russian Minister of Defense Sergei Shoigu about supplies. He was just standing and like crying, "Shoigu, where are the supplies?" And for many people in Russia, it was just a funny meme. But later, when Prigozhin actually started his rebellion, he blocked the Russian Supreme HQ in Rostov. He started demanding Shoigu and Gerasimov to be given to him and his men, and it looked like really bad. On one side, he gained some political weight because he showed himself as the one who can actually go this far to achieve his goals. But at the same time, he proved himself to be untrustful. He became dangerous, and this is why the Russian elites wanted to get rid of him. It was such an unexpected performance that greatly frightened not just the masses, but the capitalists. On June 24, when it all started, capitalists quickly started sending their business jets from the country, started fleeing the country. Russian petty bourgeoisie and middle class quickly bought all the tickets. The prices went up to several 100,000 rubles, which is probably about several $1,000s in the current prices. And at the same time, these events showed lack of any reaction from the people. All these events taking place in just 3 European regions of Russia, and Russia is the biggest country in the world. and it has 140 million people in it. The majority of the people were inactive. They showed apathy because they neither supported Putin nor Prigozhin. They just tried to keep their everyday life. And yeah, it was shown primarily in, again, making memes about the current situation. People just showed no interest. Like they actually showed interest, but the thing is that their interest was not in supporting any of the sides. They decided just to passively observe, to see, like, for them it was just a funny thing that intervened in their life, like, unexpectedly, and they had to live with it somehow, and they simply decided to keep living with it, to see how it turns out. And no, probably the fact that, again, that Lukashenko intervened was the most astounding for the Russian citizens. They were like, wow, how could this guy be solving these problems? Why is it exactly Lukashenko? This was the main thing.
So when the march was going on, the rebellion by Wagner against and the march on Moscow, there were demands by Prigozhin that he said he wanted the removal of a couple Russian military officers. And I'm not sure what became of that, but I wanted to ask about the removal of another person, Surovikin, if I'm saying that correctly. He was removed the day before this plane crash which killed Prigozhin. What's up with this?
Yes, so Surovikin was a Russian general who was responsible for organizing forces in some regions of Ukraine, which are currently under Russian control. And he was considered to be a friend of Prigozhin. He was considered to be supportive of Wagner PMC. And he was also considered to be more effective compared to other Russian generals by many patriotic and right-wing groups. And, well, to be honest, the whole event of Prigozhin's plane being destroyed and him being killed is full of different symbolism. You see, Surovikin was removed from his appointment in Russian, as they say, VKS, military space forces, which were previously just air forces. And he was replaced with another general who was known not to be supportive of Prigozhin. Another thing, as I said, was that at this very time when this plane was destroyed, Putin was attending the event dedicated to the Kursk battle, where he said, like, I'm proud of our soldiers who participate in our special military operation. And they also made a minute of silence. And these things, plus that the whole fact that it happened exactly after 2 months, exactly in 2 months after rebellion, it's full of symbolism. I would say that the government again tries to bring fear to all the groups, including loyal Z audience, and Z audience is obviously the one that supports the government. Z is one of the official symbols of the Russian special operation, and they also try to bring fear in unloyal Z audience, the one that supported Prigozhin.
So you're saying there's a kind of political indication to all of this, that well, for example, by removing Prigozhin, you would be expanding the base of Z people who, or sorry, I say Z, I get confused by the words Z. I'm an American, I say Z. The Z people are they've no one left to support but the traditional forces of the Russian state and the ruling class that are in power. Is that correct?
Yes. The thing is that in Russia in 2024 there will be presidential elections, just like in the United States. And considering this rebellion, the fact that the Russian ruling group of capitalists found a giant gap in their ranks, of course they want to fix it. They want to make everyone to be sure that they are united, they have the situation under control. And this is why they're suppressing basically everyone. You see, with the death of Prigozhin, they have disloyal that audience under control. Just recently, last month, they got Igor Girkin-Strelkov arrested. Strelkov was one of the participants of the events in Ukraine in 2014, when he was leading the Ministry of Defense of Donetsk People's Republic, so-called. He was known for his connections with the Russian state security, and he was actually among those who criticized Prigozhin for his rebellion right on June 24. And the fact was that before this thing, Strelkov showed his support of Prigozhin because he was also criticizing the government for ineffective military actions. But again, he was well known for his connections with Russian FSB, Federal Security Service, and when the rebellion started, he immediately showed that he is under FSB control. He started saying that Prigozhin is bad. And despite the fact that he showed his loyalty to the government, he got arrested for criticizing the government still. Also, the lefts were suppressed as well with the arrest of Boris Kagarlitsky. Boris Kagarlitsky is recognized as foreign agent in Russia, and to be honest, he was not a big deal. He was not even dangerous for the government. Kagarlitsky was just a social democrat that was sitting on his own YouTube channel, making some streams, attending some conferences. He showed no danger for the Russian state, yet he was arrested. Back in 2014, he was actually supportive of Luhansk and Donetsk People's Republics. He was writing different materials that if you cover the name of their author, they can be very similar to the current narratives of the Russian government. For example, I will quote one of his articles from 2014. This is what he wrote. The failure of the economic policy pursued by the Ukrainian state predetermined its collapse with the same inevitability as its cultural policy. The state no longer exists and will never exist. The cold civil war began here long before the first shots were fired, and the economic crisis with subsequent political upheavals predetermined its transition to the hot phase. Well, you see, if I hide the name of the author, it could easily be understood as some materials of the current Russian capitalist propaganda. This guy got some support from Russian leftist bloggers, from different leftist groups, because he was a social democrat and he was very convenient. He communicated with both left and right, he had close contacts with liberals, and he behaved as streamlined as possible. Well, you see, on the example of Kagarlitsky, the government got lefts suppressed, and they, of course, they also had Navalny. Navalny is also recognized as extremist and as foreign agent in Russia. He was arrested several years ago, and just recently he was sentenced to 20 years in prison for organizing extremist organizations, for this and that. In the face of Navalny, we can see that the government suppresses liberals. And again, all these things are done in order to create an image of stability, which was greatly weakened by the rebellion, to make sure that everything is ready for Putin's successful re-election in 2024 and to start his campaign in 2023.
We have the selection in the 2024 period, but we've also reported, or Politstorm has reported in the past about mobilization and how there's this new legislation to help with the future wave of mobilization. So it would make sense, political unification and political, building a solid base would be helpful or necessary for preparing for the consequences of the popular reaction to mobilization.
Yes, the fact is that currently Russian Parliament, Russian State Duma, as it's called, is on vacations, and they will get back from vacations in early September, like late August, early September, and this is when they will adopt all these laws about mobilization, about stricter laws of this mobilization. Like many people will not be able to avoid it, and by eliminating the Wagner leadership, and it's not just Prigozhin, it's also some other people like Dmitry Utkin, they may get this Wagner group, which they called stormtroopers in official Ministry of Defense statements. They can get them back to act in Ukraine, to get some more people, and the Wagner Group was considered to be one of the best experienced armed forces in Russia. They were always referred to the best of the best. And of course, if Russian armed forces get them back on their side, they will be able to act more effectively in the Ukrainian regions.
Right, and that answers some hanging questions about what is Wagner's leadership going to be like, where is Wagner going to be still operating, and we did have another individual who died in this recent crash, Utkin, who you mentioned, who's the namesake of Wagner, is that correct? And he's more of an open fan of, let's call it, mid-20th century German politics. What can we say about the other deaths, and was, is this a kind of political, or not should I say, but a control of the leadership of the Wagner Group? Will there still be use of the Wagner Group by the Russian state, and is the death of this leadership, of the Wagner leadership, is that relevant to Wagner's future actions?
Yeah, well, since you mentioned Utkin in the question, I will have to uncover his biography a little bit. So you can see, here on the screen, here is a photo with Putin from Kremlin back in 2016, and Utkin is on the most right side. So this guy started in 90s as a soldier. He acted in both Chechen wars in Russia. In 2013, he was among organizers of the so-called Slavic Corps, which was sent to Syria to defend Bashar Assad regime. It was actually one of the first Russian PMC, and when the soldiers of this PMC got back to Moscow, they were actually arrested for organizing mercenary corporation. However, in late 2013, early 2014, when there was a coup in Ukraine, Utkin met with Prigozhin, and it's in the summer 2014 when they actually made what's now officially called PMC Wagner. It was mentioned as a squad, about 100 or 200 people. In 2022, they got to the size of the brigade, about 7,000 people, and in late 2022, after mobilization, they increased their size up to several 100,000 people, about 25,000. For several years, it was impossible to prove that Utkin belonged to PMC Wagner. However, in 2016, as you can see, people made photo in the Kremlin where Utkin was receiving his order. He later got several more orders, and he also received an award called Hero of Russia. Utkin was well known to be a fan of the Third Reich. He was a neo-Nazi, and this is actually when he got his nickname Wagner. He took this nickname because Wagner was beloved by Adolf Hitler, and there were stories about him getting dressed in SS uniform, getting either like different parts of his dress filled with swastika. He was also known to wear a German World War II helmet back in 2014-2015, and as was shown during state security presence in Prigozhin's residence, they also had a declaration signed by Prigozhin and Utkin, which you can see on the screen. So yeah, this guy was also killed during this plane crash, and with this thing, well, there was a big amount of hatred among neo-Nazis, among right-wingers towards Russia. You see, a lot of them ended being on the Ukrainian side. They participated in Azov battalion, infamous Azov battalion, which is recognized as extremist organization in Russia. They also ended being in the so-called Russian Volunteer Corps, which is also Ukrainian neo-Nazi organization filled with Russian neo-Nazis. And some of them ended with being in PMC Wagner or reconnaissance squad Rusich on the Russian side. So yeah, they disapproved the government with their ineffective actions, and this is why the government wanted to get rid of some of the big talking heads, including Utkin.
And what can we say more about the reaction among the public to this event, and maybe some of the symbolism and the meaning behind the event that can be read into by the Russian public?
Well, for now, of course, different that loyal audience is cheering Prigozhin. They say like he was, despite his rebellion, he was a big guy. He brought this PMC Wagner to life, and even Putin actually admitted that he was a good guy. Just recently, there were messages about Putin. Like, let me see. Yeah, so he made some statements. He said that Prigozhin was a man of a difficult fate with serious mistakes in his life. However, he said that PMC Wagner made a big contribution to the fight against Nazism in Germany and Ukraine. They will never forget about it. He also said that they started researching the reasons of his death, like how it happened, and he also said he will wish everything best to the families of all who died in the plane crash. So even the president tries to show his opinion as positive, not as negative.
Well, we have some questions that maybe we could talk about, unless we want to talk about the actions of Wagner for the past 2 months. They've had, these past 2 months to act. What have they done with this time? But we also have a question about two people named Strokov and Gubarev. I don't know if you can say anything about these two, or.
So Gubarev was one of the disloyal Z audience. He was known for acting in LDPR back in 2014, and later he became critical of the Russian government. So yeah, he was supporting Prigozhin in late June 2023, and he got the government's attention as well. As for other people, I think they make no sense.
And I can say a little bit about some of Wagner's actions for the past 2 months. Do you have anything that sticks out for you?
Yes, I can actually make a brief story about them. Well, as I said before, after the rebellion, they were allowed to transfer to Belarus, but at the same time, they kept developing in Africa. Prigozhin went silent after the rebellion for a certain period of time. He also published his first video after the rebellion on July 17. He was speaking to the mercenaries in Belarus, and he said that if needed, they can make Belarusian army the second army of the world, and if it's necessary, they gonna fight for them. And he also announced their new way of development in Africa. In late July, Prigozhin's photos appeared from Russia-Africa summit in Petersburg. They actively acted in Africa for the last several years in different countries. I can actually show it on the map. Yeah, so there you can see the map of Wagner's presence in Africa. You can see it's countries like Northern African countries like Libya, Algeria, Western African countries, Central one like Central African Republic, Congo, Angola. They also have people in the Eastern Africa, and they also have people in Venezuela. So Prigozhin had a good amount of connections with African countries, and it's no wonder he was presented at this summit. And on August 21st, like several days ago, the last Prigozhin's video was published from one of the African countries, where he stated that Wagner will make Russia even greater on all the continents, make Africa more free, and it will bring nightmares to Islamic State group, Al-Qaeda, and other bandits. I will show this video on the screen.
Работаем. Температура плюс 50. Все как мы любим. ЧВК «Вагнер» проводит РПД. Делает Россию еще более великой на всех континентах. А Африку еще более свободной. Справедливость и счастье для африканских народов. Кошмарим ИГИЛ, Аль-Каиду и других бандосов. Берем на работу настоящих богатырей и продолжаем выполнение задач, которые были поставлены и которые мы давали обещание, что справимся.
So yeah, this was his last video. After that, this plane was actually flying from Africa, and this is where he was killed.
That's very interesting that he goes to Africa for this. I think it shows the interest of Russia itself in Africa, but all eyes are on Africa lately. The U.S. Pentagon is shifting focus towards Africa more and more. And I had some information about the presence of Wagner in Africa. So we had some questions in the chat relevant. If we have time to discuss Sudan and the coup in Niger as well.
Well, regarding some of these countries, I can say that there were some actually interesting stories about Wagner defending Chinese economic interests. The thing is that, Russia is trying to expand in Africa not because it wants to subjugate them and promote their own economic interests. Like, yes, they do it, but it's not the single goal. Another goal is that they want to distract the other imperialists to have something to bargain with. You see, like, no wars go forever, and sooner or later the current events in Ukraine, in other countries, they will end. And Russian capitalists just want to make sure that they have some aces under their sleeve when the moment of bargaining comes, and this is where they gonna trade, like African country for security in Europe, for example. There were, for example, materials about some Wagner Group mercenaries evacuating Chinese workers from Central African Republic. There were also things about them protecting different objects in Kenya. And Kenya, for example, is the country where Chinese capital is expanding greatly. It's in just several years, starting from 2017, they created numerous objects like Mombasa port, connecting railroad from Mombasa to Nairobi, different other ports, and they were bringing a lot of investments in this region. And however, it was not just investments, but also Chinese workers. And this thing brought a big debt for Kenya. It made the state officials even more corrupted. And since they brought Chinese workers and didn't employ the Kenyan ones in the big numbers, it also brought some rise in unemployment. Yeah, this was the problem, and Russia, as a country that is subjugated, whose imperialists are allied with the Chinese imperialism, they of course tried to make sure that they keep developing, having an agreement with the Chinese capitalism.
Right, and this shows us a little more about this supposed multipolar order, what some are calling very sinisterly the New World Order, especially with recent reports of all these people, all these countries joining the BRICS alliance. But just to expand on the kind of how this narrative of a bifurcated world where you've got the U.S. and its forces on one side and China and Russia neatly separated, I think that's a little complicated, especially by Wagner's actions, because as you're saying, the patrolling mines and helping Chinese workers. But the presence of these industries in places like the Central African Republic and in the Congo, multiple countries, many capitalists in many different countries benefit from this work. And I wanted to point out part of Wagner's presence in Sudan and its relation to that. And so Sudan had a lot of important developments lately, lots of coups d'etats, and most recently with a group of special forces called the Rapid Support Forces. Now, the previous president is the one who invited Wagner into Sudan. And this previous president was an ally of, I believe, Qatar and Turkey, so very NATO aligned. And he invited Wagner in basically to introduce Russian capital into Sudan. That's what the reporting is showing, that the former president of Sudan wanted this gold mining company called Moro Gold to be operating and mining. They wanted Russian equipment and Russian expertise. Also for exploration, for new sites for gold mining. So that was a very important factor in Wagner's presence in Sudan. But now we have all this political development and all these coups d'etats in Sudan. And it was this previous president, al-Bashir, who created this coup force, the Rapid Support Forces, who are now working very closely with Wagner, and everyone's saying, spooky, Wagner is supporting this coup d'état. Well, it was created under a pro-NATO regime. It was created under, and Wagner was introduced into the area because of the needs of not just Russian capital, but many capitalists in many countries needed security for their mines. And that's why I thought it was interesting for you to bring up China, because the behavior of Wagner in Sudan and in Central African Republic, where they're very present, it resembles very closely the UN police forces. And now these forces are mainly equipped and funded by China. It used to be the US and France were the big donors of the UN police forces, but now the main one is China. So yeah, the previous administration in Sudan brought in Wagner to do this mine security, and now and they created the Rapid Support Forces also in alignment with the U.S. and the EU. The previous administration of al-Bashir wanted to, through this agreement with the EU and the U.S., limit immigration through Sudan. Lots of people entering Libya, going from places where there's all this unrest, especially in Eritrea. There's the Tigray conflict, so there's lots of migration going through that region. And the previous ruler of Sudan got lots and lots of money from the EU and the US to stop this immigration. And it was the Russian or the Rapid Support Forces, as well as Russian help secure those borders to prevent this. And now these Russian support forces are fighting a coup in Sudan, and they have a political, aspect too, that they've repressed the Sudanese Communist Party, which I can't say much about this party, but they destroyed their headquarters in Khartoum, and just last month, the other side of that coup in Sudan, the Sudanese armed forces, they also repressed the Sudanese Communist Party. So we have both sides of this conflict who are trying to control the bourgeois democratic forces and crush bourgeois parliamentarism in their battle for control of the country. And it's not straight up, a division between U.S. and China. Both U.S. and China have shared interests in basically having these mines running and keeping these mines running. And I wanted to connect that to, if I have the second, to the more recent development in Niger. And so lots of people are talking about, Russia is the big hero of Africa. Prigozhin himself is saying Wagner's going to make Africa free. And so the main part of that narrative has been these coups d'etats by basically special forces groups in countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, and now Niger. Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to say that about Niger, there was some information that Wagner was involved in preparing the rebels here. And as for Niger, it's a bit uncertain for now, since there were some statements, including Prigozhin himself, saying that they will make something here. But what was more well known for the Russian audience was the Wagner's presence in the Central African Republic, where they had a big representation, where they even made a film called Guys from Hell, about basically PMC doing good things in this country. And of course, this good PMC was the PMC Wagner for them. Wagner, as I said, and as you could see on the map, has a big presence in Africa. And just few days ago, Russian delegation visited Libya. They visited this rebellious general who started attacking the so-called national government in Tripoli, which was recognized by the Western countries. And PMC Wagner provided some aid for this general. They even managed to get in Tripoli outskirts with his help. And this is where they got their presence as well. So yeah, Wagner had a big role in different African countries, and with the leadership of PMC Wagner being destroyed, Russia has greater chances to get this organization under their control.
Right, and just to clarify for the audience, so I see we're a little confused that the previous administration in Sudan, there's a lot of gold mining there, and basically their intention with inviting Wagner in was to bring in Russian capital, Russian mining equipment, Russian expertise to do gold mining. So that's a connection to the mining industry there. Besides the very important role that both Wagner and the UN police play in patrolling around these mines and basically controlling political activity in the countries where they operate. They intimidate and even repress local demonstrations and local political manifestations. So, not we can see that kind of tangentially through the Russian rapid support forces in Sudan, repressing various parties, various groups, and Wagner helps them get equipment. This is alleged that Wagner is helping the RSF get equipment, but they have a long history of cooperation anyway that has helped the RSF be in the position it is today to challenge control of the country. And in Niger, I'm sure it's very similar. This is a very similar economic base as in Sudan, but where Niger makes a lot of money from mining, and foreign capitalists in many countries, including Russian capitalists, are very interested in that mining. And so Wagner isn't in Niger formally, at least in a military way. And we can go back to that map, if people need to review that presence or lack thereof, that Wagner is mainly concentrated in Mali. There's a huge force in Mali right now, and this is borders on Niger. So what happened recently, I believe 3 weeks ago, this coup d'etat government of Niger came to power basically saying that the US and the French were not helpful in the fight against Al-Qaeda and Islamic State forces, Islamists and kind of rebel groups in general in Niger. The coup government, the junta in Niger, has an argument something like Prigozhin himself, where they're saying, oh, they're not patriotic enough. So that's the narrative by which this junta comes to power. So 3 weeks ago, in order to help this fight against Al-Qaeda, they called up Wagner, which has huge forces, I believe 3,000 is what the map says, in Mali, just across the border. So these Wagner forces have been fighting Al-Qaeda, the same group of Islamists, kind of across both borders. They don't perceive the border in the same way, so they're on the Mali side and they're on the Niger side at the same time. And so 3 weeks ago, the junta forces basically invited Wagner into Niger to offer their services, and I believe one of the coup leaders met with a leader of Wagner. But after that, I believe only a few days ago, Al-Qaeda on the border of Mali and Niger laid an ambush for Wagner patrols, border patrols, and they completely surrounded a Wagner unit and prevented them, in the Al-Qaeda group's own words, from entering Niger. So we have some interesting manifestations of this political element, where the Niger junta is saying, "Oh, we need to defeat Al Qaeda," and now Al Qaeda is trying to prevent Wagner from getting involved. So even Al Qaeda is acting patriotically in a way. So it's very very confusing situation. But even the coup in Niger, it's not the enemy of the West yet that many people on the Z crowd or the social chauvinists will like to say, that the junta in Niger is so pro-Russia and rah-rah. But we haven't really seen, there were false claims about the ejection of French and American capital. So the fact that these claims are false, that French troops remain in Niger, as far as I have received updates. American troops, 1,000 American troops, are still in Niger. So these pro-Russian regimes are not really changing their policy much. And I think that really just goes to show something which I was trying to say before, that there isn't really a bipolar split in who benefits from these developments. America would be presumably happy. America is there to fight Al Qaeda. Basically, that's what they say. So America would be happy to have Wagner fighting against Al Qaeda too. So the idea that they're totally contradictory is a little silly.
I would say that all the sides basically try to portray themselves as anti-imperialists, anti-neocolonialists. You see, Russians are portraying themselves as those who fight against Western imperialism for freedom, to liberate Africa from neocolonialism. Chinese are doing the same, and well, even Europeans and Americans claim that they want to protect freedom and democracy from new colonialism by Russia, for example. So all the sides are trying to dress themselves up in those anti-imperialist clothes. But in reality, well, you probably know this photo from Iraq with Americans holding SS signed flag. It was really infamous across the internet. But Wagner PMC is basically the same thing. We have a neo-Nazi as one of the heads of this organization, this Dmitry Wagner Utkin, after whom this organization was literally named. And we have neo-Nazis in Ukraine, yes, but we also have neo-Nazis in the Russian army, in the Russian forces. And how could one say that, these are progressive, these are lesser evil, these are real anti-imperialists, or say that all these things are justified for Russia? It's simply wrong.
Right, and the actions of Wagner in Niger is very similar, if not identical, to the actions of the US and the French in Niger. The goal is to police the mines, patrol the mines, and police the politics of the people of Niger, frankly, to make it not go in the wrong direction. But the most important thing being that they're fighting Al Qaeda basically for the benefit of keeping the uranium flowing, keeping those exports going out to the developed countries. Raw resources have to leave Niger, and Wagner helps with that. So there's no contradiction there.
Yeah, and one thing I'd like to touch is that just recently Russian space aircraft named Luna 25, which was planned to land on one of the moon poles. It was launched just a few days ago, and it was probably planned to coincide it with the day of the Russian flag, which happened on August 2022. 2022, sorry. So this spacecraft crashed, and when it started, there were brave slogans that Russian cosmonautics are rebirthed, they are recreated, the glory of the Soviet past, but in reality, it just went down. And at this very time, Indians managed to successfully land their own spacecraft on the moon, and it started exploring it already. So what I wanted to say is that cosmonautics, like astronautics, is an indicator of the development of the state in general. The pinnacle of its scientific, of its industrial, of its technological power, because only the countries with big capabilities in these spheres can develop spacecraft things. And the fact that Russia, well, the Soviet Union managed to win the space race with different things, the first satellite in space, the first human in space, the first human in open space, all of these things, they showed that the Soviet Union was the state that was greatly developed in all these spheres. Of course, they had their problematic launches as well, but they also had a lot of good ones. And if we take Russia, I would say that they have very few successes in the space industry. Almost all launches like this are unsuccessful. They are getting destroyed. And India, the country that was considered to be a colony for centuries. It was a colony for centuries. Now it's showing that it also has a great industry, that it can launch their own spacecraft things, and it can successfully land them, which is even better. And yeah, it shows that Russian imperialism, well, it's parasitic, and secondly, it has nothing to do with its Soviet past.
Right, and even Russia's friends, as the BRICS people like to call themselves, this group, this alignment in which Russia is today, isn't helpful for keeping Russia in this position of space development. We reported in past weeks or months that the Kazakh state is seizing the facilities of the famous Baikonur space launch facility. So the variability for Russia to have a place to launch its rockets and have a place to continue the space industry is being undermined by its own allies, quote unquote, due to this inter-imperialist conflict that even happens within such close friends as Kazakhstan and Russia.
Yeah, exactly. Like, of course, this was one of the actions performed in order to strengthen the image of the Russian ruling group before these presidential elections. But again, it failed, and it only showed that Russian science is way inferior compared to the Soviet one.
Well, that's most of our discussion worn out, and I think we've answered a lot of the questions that have arisen from this event and the situation in Russia in general. Do you have any concluding thoughts or remarks?
Well, I think I can only say that to our audience, to our viewers, don't forget to press the like button if you have not done it yet. Subscribe, and you can also support us by asking a question online by going to the link in your bottom left part of the screen. Our resource has no funding, but people's funding, and it's you who can keep our content in production. I would also say that all these things, like the Wagner rebellion, this plane crash, they went without communists' role, without their participation. And it's because currently there is no real communist party in Russia. The CPRF is openly pro-government organization, social chauvinist one. Another so-called Russian Communist Workers' Party is basically the same thing, and we're here in Russia as Russian communists from Palestine. We're struggling to make a communist party, and this is why we're aiming our goals at the international sphere as well. This is why, for example, we have people from the United States, from other countries. And if you want to help us in our work, you can join us by filling the application. I will put the link in the chat. And if we want to have new Lenins, the only way we have is to become Lenins ourselves.
Well, thank you, Vasily, for speaking to us today, and I'd like to thank all of our viewers for joining us.
Thank you, comrades, and goodbye.